Hello, everyone. Today's lesson is all about painting the flowers that you will see on your final painting when all these mini lessons are over. So we're just going to stick with the two main flowers, and I'm not going to worry about color, just about brush strokes today. Have fun. Before we start painting, let's just review what we're doing. Today, we are going to practice these flowers. So on here, I have two different types of flowers. And our mini lessons that we've done so far this last couple weeks is going to help us a lot today. Here's one of my practice pieces of paper with different pressures of my brush strokes. And then here what we did with our leaves. All right, let's get started painting our two flowers. I think out of my paintbrushes that I use a lot, I think I'm just going to use two of them, a medium one and a small one. And I'm going to stick with one paint tray. I really like this paint tray the most. Decadent Pies have so many variety of colors in there. I like the blue that they have in that tray, so that's what I'm going to use today. Again, I'm just gonna use two paintbrushes today, kind of a smaller one and a medium one. Don't forget to label them as you paint if you like it. If you switch paintbrushes mid-practice, that's okay too. I'm just starting this rose with some C curves with my skinny brush. I loaded up pretty good with the paint, and then I'm adding water, and it really is helpful if you have watercolor paper. So as I'm doing this and just adding water and letting my brush touch that blue, it comes off and flows into the water. It is really relaxing and really cool just to see what your paint can do when it hits the water. And I'm just blending it out, and if I feel like I need to add more of my paint, I'm going to add more paint. If I have too much water, I just dry my brush off and I go over that puddle and it'll just soak it up. So we're just playing here. I'm going to see what this brush stroke does, but I'm just going to keep going in circles a little bit larger as I go out. I do like to hold my brush up at different angles as well. So I'm going to show you again how I'm doing this. This time I'm going to add water a little later than I did on the first one. I like to have my first layer just a little lighter because later on I can always add more detail. And I actually prefer it that way. I like to go really dark in the center of the flower and get lighter and lighter and lighter as I go out. So this way I can add details when I want. Don't be afraid to change the angle of that brush. It's really nice to, as you're doing this, is kind of like I do like wispy lines are what I call the lines that I go on the ends. So I don't do full circles. I do little dashes, long dashes. If you create a variety of brushstroke lengths, it'll have like a little bit more natural look. It'll also create variety, which will make your artwork more interesting. So the lengths of my brushstrokes will be small, medium, and large. And I just kind of play with it. You really don't know what works best for you until you play with the brush. Everyone's a little different. This one I'm just kind of going more in circles rather than having the same brush stroke over and over. Take that opportunity to try different things when you practice. Let's start with the next one. This one I love. It's really relaxing as well. I just put dots of my paint, concentrated parts of that paint, and then I will add water to it. So I load my brush up. I want to make sure I have that water. I can always adjust it. I'll put it on paper toweling if it's too much. I give those little wispy lines. I think the more you watch that, you'll really see like those wispy lines at the end that I do just to create a little bit of detail, but I want it to be loose. So I'm not going to complete each flower with a brush stroke. I like to have that negative space in there. It really gives that variety. And it just makes it a little bit more interesting. These kind of flowers, these 2 flowers, I could do all day. I just love watching the paint flow into the puddle. I love to see what it does. I'm surprised at the end too on how it looks because I I have a general idea of how I want it to look, but having those little wispy quick lines at the end, barely touching my paper and just seeing what the brush does on its own gives it more of a natural look, more of a loose look. If you don't have these tools, you can use the back end of a paintbrush. All I'm doing is putting dents really in there. I'm kind of putting that in there for lines in the flower. The paint flows into those little line dents that I'm putting in there. That's another way to help create a little bit more texture and a little bit more detail. Details really can help, but be careful. You don't want to add so much detail that it gets to be a little bit more of a tighter flower, tighter paintbrush strokes. Especially if you're looking for a looser flower, you're going to want to try to not paint too many details either. All right, let's add details now that my paper is dry. We need it dry, otherwise it is going to blend in and then we won't have the effect that we need. Right now, I have more color from on my paintbrush than water. I like to have dark, medium, and light values. And if I go do this detail when my paint is still a little wet, it'll just blend in and then dry as a medium value. So this is also helpful to know because if I do make a mistake and I do add too many of the dark values, I don't need a lot of the dark value, but I can add a little bit of water to it to kind of blend it out if I feel like I have too much. You just don't want to add a lot at this point. We were talking earlier about that. If too much detail, like right now, I feel like it has a smidge too much of that dark detail, then it gets to be too much and not loose like I would like it to be. So I just add a little bit more water. There is a lot of things you learn during this practice, and that is hopefully one of the many things you learn is just add a little water sometimes, add a little, dab a little bit with your paintbrush or paper toweling, whatever you need to do. But that's what this is for. That's why we're playing. As I play with my brush, I have switched to the smaller brush on this last painting or on this last flower. The first one, I had the bigger brush and trying to do the details with that, I just didn't care for it. But as I go back to this small brush, just like I did with the roses, I really like the delicate brush strokes when I'm doing these kind of details. And that is actually what I did in my final. And I know that I like that because I practice. I not afraid to try different things, but looking back and forth between the two paintings, I can see why I chose that thin brush for these details. This is all about playing with your brush. It's so important to feel comfortable and try new things and be okay with looking at your painting and not liking certain parts of it because you learn from those mistakes. You learn from what you did with different brush strokes, different size brushes. That's all part of the learning process, and feeling comfortable trying new things is so important. And you'll be surprised all the things that you can do and all the beautiful artwork that you can create. I hope you enjoyed this practice.